Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Chris from AppSumo, and today I am here with Greg McKeown. So if you don't know Greg, he is the New York Times bestselling author of Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, and the founder of McKeown Inc., a company with a mission to teach essentialism to millions of people around the world. Their clients include Adobe, Apple, Airbnb, Cisco, Google, Facebook, Pixar, Salesforce, Twitter, Yahoo, and many more. Greg is an accomplished public speaker and has spoken to hundreds of audiences around the world. Highlights include speaking at South by Southwest, interviewing Al Gore at the annual conference of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and receiving a personal invitation from the Crown Prince of Norway to speak at his annual innovation conference. Greg's writing has appeared on covers of Fast Company, Fortune, Huffington Post, Politico, Inc. magazine, and Harvard Economic Forum. Harvard Business School. I skipped a line. In 2012, he was named a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. Originally from London, England, McKeown now lives in Los Angeles with his wife and their 4 children. He graduated from Stanford University with his MBA. Greg, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Chris, it's great to be with you.
So how's everything going in your neck of the woods? You're in the LA area.
Yeah, it's a funny, surreal thing. As I look out the window today, it's absolutely beautiful out there. It's calm, it's quiet. There's families walking. There's, really, it's a bit of an oddity this time that we're in. It's like we're in a global timeout. Mm-hmm. We've been told to go to our rooms and have a good think about it. And come out until we've thought through it a little better.
Well, one of the things you write about in the book is the value of boredom. I think there's a lot of people who are at home and they're stuck and they're bored and they're, going through a bunch of Netflix or just trying to figure out how to keep themselves occupied. But I mean, how have you been thinking about this time for people when it comes to essentialism, like to refocus your priorities or use that self-reflective time appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I think, we have, we had the Great Depression. We have had, we had the Great Recession. I think this can be the Great Reset. And it's really a sort of an unparalleled opportunity. I've just spent years and years working with people on what is essential, right? Posing that question to people and having people grapple with it, wrestle with the answers. But for the first time, almost the entire world is being confronted with that question. And so, it's a bit involuntary. Maybe it's completely involuntary, but it's still an opportunity, and people can lean into that if they want to say, okay, what really matters now? What's essential now? All these things I used to say were essential, all these things that were non-negotiable, suddenly they were negotiable. They always were, apparently. And in that is an opportunity to explore and to really think and to not just numb ourselves through this, but to reinvent ourselves through it.
I love that. Well, it seems like what you're saying is there's a lot more opportunity to take advantage of it, but there's also a lot more opportunity to kind of slip up and let the worst of your vices kind of come out. So it's just the personal responsibility has been amplified, where a lot of the distractions, a lot of the things you might normally have to say no to, like going out on a Friday night, you don't really have that option anymore. So there's a lot more room for you to do the positive things, but also how do you handle that appropriately where you're not letting all of those vices come through?
Well, look, essentialism's key is in the title, right? It's in the word. Essential. It's figuring out, it's not just exploring generally, it's figuring out what the clear yes is so that you have a reason not to. I remember when I was just a teenager organizing an event for my high school. And we went to this event. It was well attended, lots of people there. And one of my classmates came up to me, and he was drinking, and he was a bit more than tipsy, I suppose. And he sort of started joking a little bit at my expense. Greg, you don't do any things I do. You don't party like I do. What do you do to have fun? And I remember sort of saying, this phrase came to me, I said, no, I do like to have fun. I just like to remember it in the morning. And then sort of his friends left, and my friends sort of left, and I was just sitting there with him, and he said to me, it was like a magazine moment or something, but he said, McKeown, he said, I wish I didn't do the things that I do, but I don't have a reason not to. And that was a very profound moment for me as a teenager, to just hear somebody say it that explicitly, that clearly. He had no reason not to. And you see, I think that's key for people that maybe pulled into vices in such a time as this, is that they don't have a reason not to. And that's what essentialism is all about, is to create space to figure out what really matters, so that you have a reason not to do the other stuff, a reason not to say, and it doesn't even have to just be vices, it could just be other okay things, instead of doing something that, will last over the long term.
Yeah. And that's interesting. It's not just about vices. It's the other things that could be still like beneficial, but not your core focus, not the main thing to put your effort towards. So I guess, is that where the essential intent comes in? Like, how do you go through and do that analysis to figure out, listing out all of the things you're working on or that are on your mind, and going through and like getting rid of all of the areas that don't make sense anymore?
Yes, I think there's two simultaneous things you need to do. One is to try and get all that stuff out of your head, right? So just all that noise, all of that. I know that David Allen, who I'm just about to interview on my new podcast, in fact, tomorrow. But he's want to say that our minds are really good for lots of things, but they're not good as an office. We shouldn't be trying to cram a whole office worth of information and papers in sort of the RAM of our brain, because it will totally discombobulate it. So getting all of that out, I think, is an excellent idea. It's sort of one good process, and I'll do that from time to time, just in my journal, just get it all out. But exploring what's essential goes beyond simply prioritizing that list. This is such an important distinction, because often the most important contribution that we can make isn't going to appear on our current to-do list. And so it's not just organizing what's already on there, it's actually finding the next big thing. And I think we tend to need to have a sort of timeout to do that. We have to be a bit bored. Yes, I remember the longest I'd gone at that point from without checking email or being online was about 2.5 weeks on a family vacation that we'd been on. And it was unbelievable. I mean, I had the biggest single career eureka moment in many, many years through that period. And I wasn't trying to have it. There's enough space to be able to hear within you your own voice that seems to know what you need to do next, seems to know what your goals ought to be. And that's always available to us. But we don't hear it because all the other noises are just clamoring so loudly, we are, in a sense, suffocated by all those voices. So I think, yes, get all the clutter out, but also it's create enough space just to be able to hear that voice that will guide you towards this. This is the right big next amazing mission to pursue.
And it's funny because we have this concept of shower thoughts, but it's probably not the shower that's causing it. It's just like the only time in modern life where you don't have your phone with you, you don't have your computer with you, versus it has nothing to do with the shower. It has to do with giving yourself that space. And if you opened up more of that, then you could probably have more of those ideas and create that space to build upon them.
Yes, I think that's right. I think we are not likely to have really big thoughts while staring at our phones. That's sort of a statement obvious there in a way, but we're not going to find it in our inbox. That's all of that is cumulative. That's just the ongoing journey that's already been launched. But if we want to discover a higher point of contribution, I think we have to set all of this aside and be asking that question: what is the very best use of me? What would be game-changing, so impactful, such a blessing to ourselves and others if we could achieve it 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, something above the noise. And then that can become a very helpful criteria for trying to work out, what to say yes to and what to say no to. And I've found that it can easily be the case that maybe as much as 70 or 80% of the things on our to-do list, on that flow of consciousness that we've already put down on the paper, is now irrelevant once we identify the really next big goal to go after. That becomes our super criteria. We get to use it as we look against the list. Well, will any of these items even take me an inch towards that goal? And often the case is no. So that strategic intent, that single idea, this is like one decision that makes 1,000 decisions. That's what makes it so valuable. That's what makes it so worth the effort, or the trade-off of pushing out everything else so that we can discover it. So we justify the energy and effort required to discover that thing, because it makes so many decisions for us.
Do you find that typically with people, once they get clarity on it, they fall within like a handful of buckets of ideas? Like, is it social impact or political impact, or like, are there those buckets, or is it very specific for each individual person?
Oh, look, I'm a big believer in, like a deep believer in each of us having an essential and unique mission in life. And that it isn't like, that's not one more thing we're supposed to think about, like not peripheral thought. That's like the work itself. That's what we're here to do, is to figure that out and to do it. And so I believe it is absolutely as unique as each individual. I personally, at least, have never found it useful to think in terms of political impact or social impact or this community or that community. I haven't personally found it that to be especially advantageous or accelerating. But I have found that if I get quiet enough, if I just, it's not even like really deep focused, what is my mission? No, it's not that. It's to hold the question quite gently, but to have enough space for, our mind to, and not just our mind, our heart, our soul to go sort of find the answers for us. I've just done this again myself over this period, over the last couple of months, and it was able to finally formulate one question that I thought is a totally dramatic question. I have no idea how to do, how to answer it. Even getting to the question took some time and some space and away from the to-do list to even discern it. But now, having discerned it, it is clear to me that the next 10 years of my life will be materially different because of that one question. And that's what we're going for, because we're not in a job. It's like we're not in a coal mine where we're shoveling out as much coal from point A to point B. We're really in a diamond mine. And once we wake up to that reality, suddenly it immediately justifies a completely different set of behaviors. Well, of course, I shouldn't just be so busy all the time. I can't think. We've got to explore. We've got to learn well how to discern. We've got to figure out how to find those diamonds. And that's sort of the shift between being a non-essentialist and an essentialist.
Well, I know people are going to be mad if I don't ask what that one question is that you come upon.
Yeah, no, I can't answer that, but
okay.
I understand the need to ask it. But it, and I'm not even convinced it would be that especially helpful for people to know what it was for me, precisely because of what I was saying before. What I will say is that while I was trying to formulate that question for me, my wife, Anna, and our children, we were teaching them to do the same thing. So they're aged between 11 and 17, and they were all spending 2 or 3 weeks, not full time, but 2 or 3 weeks trying to prepare and formulate a question that was really important for them to answer. So I would just say that it isn't something that that you have to wait till your 30s or 40s or whatever to go through this process. I think it's something that you can do right from, an early age, and the sooner the better, because we want to avoid just pursuing goals because other people are pursuing them, which can happen start at any age. You start doing it because the other people your age are doing it. I mean, I just was talking to Tim Ferriss, and also for the upcoming podcast, and he made a really interesting distinction in his own life with me. He said, look, for me, he says he doesn't even particularly like the word mission, and this is all just how you define it. But he says he distinguishes the difference between a mission, which is what he thinks of as a sort of self-propelled goal, something you're going after, and a calling, which is something that sort of presents itself to you, and you can feel yourself pulled towards it. And he's feeling really driven with a particular calling right now. And I liked the distinction. Again, words aside, because that's kind of what I think a mission is. It's the same idea. We're trying to find what already is there rather than just make a list and go after it.
What are some of the questions you can ask to help uncover that? If you are looking for your core question, what are some of those helper questions that can lead you towards that?
One question. Oh, do you know what? We could answer this vaguely, or I can answer it with you. How about we start with you? Is this work?
Oh man,
are you willing to be on the spot?
We can try it out. I don't know how well it's going to go, but let's do it.
Well, you don't have to overthink any of this. But here's a super helpful fast forward question, and it's this. So, Chris, tell me something right now in your life, right now, first thought that's essential to you, very important, that you're underinvesting in. So you're doing it, but you're underinvesting. Go. What's the first answer?
I would say reading.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So reading. What kind of reading?
Nonfiction books.
Okay. And are there any books particularly on your list already that you think, oh man, I should have got?
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna revise it. It's rereading and taking notes on the books that have had the biggest impact on me.
Yes, I hear you. So these are books that you already know they've made a difference, but you'd like to have them go deeper within you.
Yes. Because
you believe that if they go deeper, that you'll get a lot more from them than just moving on to another book.
1000%.
Okay, so name a couple of those books that.
Nassim Taleb's, his whole series. So Anti-Fragile is the next one I want to go back through.
Okay, so you want to go back through Anti-Fragile, and how long do you suspect that would take you to do?
God, I don't know. It's a big one. Maybe 20 hours.
Okay, it's a 20-hour process. Over what period of time would you like to do it?
Probably 2 weeks.
Okay, so we're talking 90 minutes a day, something like that, an hour and a half commitment. Why does this matter so much to you?
Because basically what you said, I found that I used to have a very kind of like a horny kid's attitude towards book, where it was just, how many can I get through in a year? Let me read 200 books this year. But over that time, I would think through like what was most essential. And there's probably 20 books or so out of those hundreds that I've read that really had an impact that I've brought up in conversations for years and years and years. And then the times when I have gone back through a book that was impactful for me, I realized that like I had just scratched the surface. And if it was so impactful, going back through it is going to be like worth the value of rereading 10 more books.
Yeah. I love that. And also what I've found is that when we remember an idea, people tend to think about remembering as like, oh, I forgot and now I've remembered it, so now it's back. But what really is happening is that the idea is going deeper. And as it goes deeper, we're going sort of from mind to heart. And that's quite a long journey, mind to heart. Intellectually, we can understand all sorts of things very quickly, but to actually allow it to become part of us so that we, the book is living inside of us and those ideas have become, part of our core identity. That's where an enormous amount of the richness and the benefits come from. So that all makes sense to me. Okay, so now let's just take the sort of next step in the essentialist logic, right? We've just explored what was something that was essential. We've identified it. What does it, we've given some scope to it, what success looks like, so on. Now I want to go to the other extreme. I just want you to first thought now, what is anything that is non-essential that you're over-investing in currently? Honest answers, right off, go.
Just wasting time on YouTube videos.
Okay, YouTube videos, just watching YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Give me another example.
Oh man, Netflix.
Yep,
Yeah,
Netflix.
probably shouldn't be watching Too Hot to Handle.
Right. Okay. So you got Netflix. You binge watching Netflix. Okay. Give me one more.
Oh man.
That might be
another one.
That might be
we'll
sufficient.
go with those for now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how much time are you spending per day on those? Honest answer. This is in service of everybody. Don't fret.
I would say probably at least 2 to 3 hours a day.
Yeah, right. And I think a lot of people would admit to the same thing. Most people are willing to do that, and maybe it's even more than they're even willing to admit to. But say so we got 2 or 3 hours. Is any of that happening through the day, or is it all just last thing sort of evening?
It's mostly at night, but yeah, it creeps in during like the breaks in the day for sure.
Yeah, right. So instead of a break being, getting up and going for a walk, or in fact reading a book, listening to a book while you walk, it's like, okay, I kind of need a break, and then you're on YouTube. But YouTube can be, or Netflix can be, they're well designed. So instead of it being, okay, I'll take a 15-minute break, the second episode is automatically starting, the next thing is already there, and this infinite pool of information, entertainment is just flowing. So suddenly it's half an hour, it's an hour, when we really, in our mind, we're only planning to have a 10-minute, whatever. So does this all sound familiar? I'm putting words.
Oh, very, very much so. You're nailing it. You've done this before.
So here we are. So we've identified the thing, right? We've identified that something that you is really valuable. We've identified something on the other end of the spectrum that is really non-essential. And so now what we're trying to do is make it as easy as possible for you to make that switch. Right. So how can we do it? I mean, I already mentioned something as we were going through that. One thing is that you listen to the book. It doesn't allow you to take notes, does it? So that doesn't quite work. But I guess it wouldn't be a bad way to get back into it. Every time you want to take a break. So it's as soon as you go, okay, let me just go to YouTube. As soon as you go to that little link, you go, no, I'm standing up. And you pick up your phone, you pick up your headphones, and you just go for a walk, and you listen until you're ready to get back to work. Like you go for a walk for 20 minutes, half an hour. How does that sound to you?
I like it. Yeah.
Does it seem believable, really? I mean, I know you're incentivized to say it does, but could you really imagine doing that?
Okay, well, let me put your feet to the fire on this. So how would you deal? So making it a bit more complex, what if watching Netflix is also a way you spend time with people? So with my girlfriend, that's kind of how we'll unwind at night. But I guess that can also go towards that doesn't mean the YouTube stuff also has to happen. So I think that's where I can start taking the margin out.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think it's not the social time at night right now, partially because I think that is playing quite an important emotional buffer role for a lot of people. It's like, yeah, we're working, we're doing it, we're trying to be productive, even under these unusual, uncertain, odd experience, period. And so that's like okay, I'm having a break from all of that uncertainty, and for a lot of people, anxiety. And I think that so I maybe wouldn't touch that right now. Maybe you have a cutoff. You could have like instead of this time at night, I'm going to be done by this time so that I can get a full sleep, before the next day. I mean, I could see an adjustment there for a lot of people. But for this right now, I'll just say it's just YouTube. Just instead of switching to YouTube, you just go, I'm going to listen to this. I'm going to give up one for the other. Are you willing to make that trade-off, first of all?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's incentivize you. Okay. Right? So you're doing it publicly now anyway. So you're already way more incentivized than you were before.
Yep.
So you just commit to in the next episode, you saying whether you've done it or not. That creates tremendous social pressure to do that. Are you willing to do that?
Right. Sure, let's do it.
This is so much more than you bargained for today.
Yeah, man.
Okay. So then more. You need a prize, right? You need like a prize where you say, okay, I'm gonna get to what? You tell me. I don't know what it is. Once I have finished rereading Anti-Fragile and taking notes on it, I will what? What's the reward? Give me any reward. Man, silly, whatever.
What rewards can you have these days? Help me brainstorm. What are some things we could do?
Well, you could
Maybe I'll go through my Amazon shopping cart and see what prize I want to get myself.
Yeah, you could do that. I like that you just you came up with that. The whole point is that it's an external, silly but concrete thing. That's exactly what it is. It is a prize, and I'm not ashamed of it calling it that. It's something that just helps you when you otherwise would rather do YouTube. You go, no, this is going to be fun. I'm going to get this done, and look at that. 2 weeks from now, I'm going to, like, I know someone has a favorite podcast, actually, they listen to, and they say they're only allowed to listen to that when they run. So that's like one way to incentivize them to be running, because that's their favorite time to do it. So you could have a particular movie that you're like, or a show, one of these shows you are watching, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to watch any more of that until I've finished reading this. Or I only get to watch that tonight if I have read the next chapter and taken notes on it. You know, so that there's something built in that just gives you an excuse to do it today when otherwise at the margin you might not do it. So anyway, this is something to be going on with. Another thing you can do is just talk to your girlfriend and actually tell her about this. Say, look, I need your help. I want to get off YouTube for at least these 2 weeks. And I like your help for doing it. I'm going to, just explain what you just explained to me. Tell her why you want to make the change. That's the most important thing, and most people miss this. You explain all the whys you want to make the shift, and then you help them to do it. What we've just done, so just summarizing what we've just done, we've looked at explore, eliminate, and execute. We identified something that was important, essential, by exploring it. We identified something non-essential that could be eliminated, and then we've said, okay, how do we execute that? How can we make it a little easier to actually do it when we might not otherwise do it? And that is the cycle of essentialism. Explore, eliminate, execute. Again and again and again in the simplest and easiest of ways. And the reason I tried to answer this bigger question in this practical way is that sometimes people just get so lost in the philosophy, the idea of it. Oh, what is the most important thing I could possibly be doing? And that's it. It's just too overwhelming. They can't even get forward. And in this little illustration, yes, we didn't discover the 5-year transformational question. That wasn't what I was going for. What we discovered is that you already know something. Like, you already know there's something essential you're not doing and there's something non-essential you are doing. So we don't have to gather new light. We have to act on the light we have. And as we act on the light we have, we will get more light and more light. And eventually in that light, we see things are revealed that used to be hidden. And eventually that light grows until we have like a breakthrough. And suddenly we do have a question that's a total game changer. We do have an insight, an essential intent that we know would make a huge difference for us and for others. But it happens bit by bit by trading off a little bit of non-essential darkness for a little more essential light.
I love that. I love it. No, and it goes to, speaking of, it goes to one of the things that Nassim Taleb talks about is solving problems via negativa, like subtracting things, taking things away, as opposed to just adding more and more and more onto a system. And so that seems like exactly what you're talking about is how do you take things away? It's not you need to go find something. It's you need to move all of the clutter aside to see what's already there.
Yes. I mean, I certainly think that, it's a good thought experiment to simply say, what if I could only solve this via elimination? Like, what if that was my only option? What might I innovate in this? I mean, normally when we say the word innovate, we mean, without knowing it, we mean something new, something added. That's just sort of built into our assumption set. But what if we said, we're going to only remove in order to innovate? It's, for example, we have, the idea of running a pilot is try something new, see what the impact is. But a reverse pilot, as the term implies, is let's stop doing something, let's remove something and see what the impact is. You don't have to announce it, just stop doing it. Try one day with no YouTube. I'm not going to go on YouTube one time for one day. That's out. What happens? Was it painful? Was it actually irritating all day long? Or was it actually totally freeing to you? Experiment in it, but experiment in a reverse way. Remove one thing, see what happens. Remove something else, see what happens. It's a great way of I worked with a leader one time who did a reverse pilot. He was new into his new executive position in the company. His predecessor had spent probably half of the resources of the entire division in the company developing an every 2 weeks report for the rest of the executive team. And this the person I was working with wasn't convinced that this was being utilized well, wasn't being read well. And so he said, okay, I'm just going to not produce this. We're just going to stop and we're just going to see what happens. And what he found is that nothing happened at all. Nobody ever asked for it. That means that he got a rebate of half of his resources through this little experiment. And I think in our own lives, we can do the same. Just try not doing something, see what happens. You can always put it back, but just test it out.
Well, that's what you talk about with, what is it? I have it written down, the zero-based budgeting in terms of, as opposed to just looking at all of the things you have to do versus like, let's start from ground zero. Each thing on my calendar has to re-justify itself every time.
Yeah, I was just had a really interesting interview with, I don't know if you remember the story, but when Steve Jobs died, there was a whole series of articles that we read about, written about him, and Harvard Business Review had a summary by Isaacson. And one of the stories that he tells there that then got subsequently told many, many places was about iDVD and the creation of the iDVD app. And I was reading all about that, working on a new book, and I went back and I found one of the people that were actually in the room when all of this went down. And so I interviewed him, spent an hour talking to him just recently, and he explained the background to this. And if you'll allow, I think it's very interesting. First of all, there was, at the time, DVD burning systems were for like the ultimate professionals only, very, very expensive. I think sort of $70,000 for a DVD burning machine. And so the person I was talking to was in a company trying to produce one that was maybe $5,000. So it's still for pros, but way more affordable. So it has a few less features and so on, and it's digitized. And so then the company got purchased by Apple because Apple wanted to install this as software on their high-end machines. So now what they were doing is they were taking, okay, well, we've got our $5,000 offering, which was a 1,000-page user manual. I mean, it's almost unthinkable now, isn't it? 1,000-page user manual. And so they spent weeks working, trying to simplify that even further. And they prepare for this meeting with Steve, and they have it already. They're excited to show him all these screenshots of what they think the app would look like. And he comes in and he just walks up to the whiteboard. He's clearly been thinking about this app already. And he just walks up to the whiteboard and he just draws a rectangle on the whiteboard. And it puts a little button on there, says burn. He says, this is how the app's going to work. You're going to grab your files, you're going to pull them there, and you're going to press burn. That's what we're going to build. That's it. And the people in the room were just so shocked by that because, and this is the key insight, is that they were still operating on how do you hack away at the existing complexity. Let's piece by piece. And they were so proud of how much they'd removed. But Steve was coming at it exactly the opposite angle. He was starting from zero and he was saying, what is the minimum that we need in order to achieve this objective? And I just think that's so true for us in all of our efforts, wherever possible, to begin and say, look, if I didn't have anything, if I didn't own all this stuff, if I hadn't committed to all of these things, what would I do now to achieve what it is I'm trying to achieve that seems so important to me?
That's a great story. That's for the podcast?
Well, we'll see if I use it in the podcast, but it may appear in the next book, some of the details. But maybe we'll put the whole thing on there, because I thought it was so fascinating to hear the details of what was going on in the room and what the room looked like and how that conversation. I mean, I just found all of that in the background was more interesting than anything I'd read in the general populace, the general popular press rather. And so I was happy to get to those details.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of another story. So I read your book for the first time a couple of years ago, probably like when it came out. And I remember there's this story about a guy who's going to Steve Jobs. I think he was a consultant to design a label or a logo, and he goes,
Yeah.
hey, why don't you present me with a couple options? And he goes, no, I'll give you a solution. It's the best way I know how to do it. You can take it or leave it, but that's it. And I remember reading that. And then when I was doing consulting work afterwards, I completely shifted the way I would have those conversations, where it's not like, hey, I'll throw some ideas. It's, I will go at this problem the best way I know how, and then you kind of take it or leave it.
Yeah, that's right. It was when Steve had been, it was after he was kicked out of Apple and he'd started Next, and he wanted a great logo because he'd had Apple's logos. It was one of the best logos ever, and he wanted a great one for his new company. So he went to one of the top logoists of the time, they did Bloomingdale, ABC, a whole bunch of iconic logos, and it was quite crotchety, actually, according to Steve Jobs' accounts of this. He was just like, no, we're not doing it the way you're saying. That's not how it's going to be. I will solve your problem for you completely. And Steve said of that experience, he said it was a jewel of a logo. He said, a jewel of a logo. He paid him the $100,000 for that logo, and added to it that this guy was the ultimate professional. Why is a guy who says no to you the ultimate professional? Because he'd thought through how to create value more deeply than Steve had. And that's what gives you the right to be able to push back. And that's exactly why, I didn't write a book called Noism. It's not about saying no to everyone and everything. It's about what's essential. And in this case, he had figured out what was essential to Steve more thoughtfully. And that's what gave him the leverage to be able to push in this way, because he's not just pushing against Steve. He's going, no, I'm pushing for you. I've just thought about this more than you have. So here's how I can create that value. That to me is how you go from being an order taker to a trusted advisor, is you think through it more deeply. And again, just not lose it. That's explore, eliminate, and execute. It's the same process. You take the time to explore what really is valuable. So then you have the leverage to negotiate what is not valuable. And then you can come collaboratively into how to build a plan for execution that everybody's happy with. It's the same pattern. It's the same process.
So one of the things that I was thinking about early on in my career is, even if you, I guess, accept all of these principles, being able to put that into action when you're kind of the low man on the totem pole, where there still seems to be that feeling of, you got to be doing a lot of output and everyone's got to be seeing what you're working on. And when they say like, hey, let me know what you did this week, you can't just put one bullet point because that's all you did. So what do you recommend to somebody who is, maybe they're not like an executive where they can just say, now this meeting's useless, I'm just going to sit out on it. What does somebody do if they're kind of younger?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that in practical terms, in the early days, you're going to want to signal that you're game for things, right? That you're hungry, that you want to learn, that you're leaning into that the opportunity for experience. So essentialism isn't selfishism. It's not arrogance. I'm above this. I'm too good for this. No, it's not that. But neither is it to simply go, my brain is not needed here, that my insight is not valuable, that I'm not going to learn. I'm just going to be an order taker and nothing else. I think that what we have to discover even early on is that we aren't operating. We don't have to operate with a mindset that says it's either the polite yes or the rude no. If you think it's a polite yes or a rude no, then most people are going to do a lot more polite yeses until maybe they're just almost burned out, and then there's a rude no, and that's not good either. So, but what about the middle space? In fact, I happen to have it here on my desk, but as just sort of happens to be convenient here, a little note. It's been laminated now I was sharing it, and somebody was so keen that I never lose it that they laminated it for me. It's just a situation not dissimilar to what you're describing, power differential, because it was me with my daughter. She was 14 years old, and I was trying to persuade her to read a certain book. Good book, I don't remember what it was, but something. I wanted to do it today, like, look, just make this happen. It was so useful to. And then she didn't want to do it, but we didn't argue. But I just came back to my office here and was on a meeting, and and she slipped this note under my door, and I want to read it to you because this illustrates just exactly what I'm saying. She writes, "I already expressed my unwillingness to read this book, but I'm willing to make a counter offer. I am not willing to read it all in one day today, but I'd be happy to explore the possibility of reading it in the future over the course of a few weeks. I believe it would be best to wait till the end of my literature assignment. If you would like me to read this book in place of a separate assignment and over the course of a few weeks, I'm sure that can be made possible." I think that demonstrates exactly the idea that there's this third option, which is negotiation, and that we earn the right to negotiate by thinking carefully through the trade-offs so that we can express those trade-offs. It's not just, yes, I'll do it, or no, I'm not going to do it. It's, well, let's talk about it. Trade-offs are always real, so let's have a conversation about them so that we start slowly, step by step, moving up the value chain so that eventually someone thinks we're a trusted advisor, not just no-name order taker.
So what did you do as a parent that produced that letter?
Yeah, I married her mother. You know, it's an interesting question. I mean, one of the things is that I've had each of my children travel with me often. One of the unintended consequences of pursuing a life of teaching and writing is travel. And so there's lots of ways you can minimize that, and I've done a lot to minimize it. But one of the things that we stumbled on was the idea that if I would take a child with me, then we'd get great one-on-one time. They'd have an adventure. As it turns out, it makes it more of an adventure for me. I gain a lot more from my travel now with them. And here's the thing, is it's meant that they have been in these meetings where we've had these discussions with business leaders, with industry-specific meetings, and they will often answer questions in the room, and they're part of it. They're not just sort of shoved away in a corner somewhere. They're part of it. And I think that has in some ways inculcated the language and therefore the culture of essentialism. And that's one of the things I love most about that little story and that little note, is that you don't want to be the only essentialist in the room. You want to expand it. You want it to become a culture so that you know, the least empowered person is more empowered than they were before. You want anyone with valuable insight and intelligence to feel that they can speak up and say, well, yes, we could do the thing you've just said, but how does that affect the really important strategic essential intent that we've already discussed and agreed on? You want everyone to feel that kind of empowerment because you want to access everybody's full intelligence and capability. So I think that first you just need to try and introduce the language early. You don't have to wait till they're older. You can start in this case with young children, but people on your team, you want to introduce it, have people read Essentialism, discuss it, so that we can talk about things that otherwise are untouchable.
Do you find that there's different essential intents for both personal and business, or do you try to recommend people kind of find that overarching thing that guides their decisions regardless of the realm?
Look, I think that organizations, wherever you can have a team that will successfully identify an essential intent, everybody's benefited by that. That's just valuable for everyone. And there's some terrific examples of companies that have done this. Similarly, in people's individual lives, I think on the individual level, you ought to do this work together. I mean, you ought to do that work thoroughly. That's what I mean to say. And you're going to find that there is discrepancy between what the team and organization's intent is and what your personal intent is. Of course, they're not going to be perfectly aligned. And then you have to figure out what to do with that. They're not perfectly aligned right now. So not defining them doesn't make you more aligned. It just makes everybody more vague. So you just aren't aware of why you feel so weird when you're going to work or when you're working on a team and you always feel such conflict and contention there. And a lot of it is because actually they're trying to do X and you're trying to do Y, and these they're never going to work. So I think do the work on your team, do the work individually, and see where there can be overlap, see where it can make sense and over what period of time. But don't spend 10 years, 20 years in a team that's really not aligned just because you didn't do the work to see that and understand that, because it will still extract an immense cost from you individually and from the team to be going in different directions.
What do you find, if anything, that people get wrong or miss about essentialism?
Well, one of the things that I think people miss is that essentialism doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to be perfect at it. In fact, I think that sometimes people will read essentialism, they'll buy into the language and they'll buy into the logic and they'll go, yeah, I want to live like this and do this and lead like this. So they've bought into it, but then they're still trying to live out essentialism using a non-essentialist mindset. So now all they're trying to do is everything essential perfectly now. It's like and so it's completely overwhelming to try and do that. It's completely unrealistic. So what I want is for people to try to become essentialists in an essentialist way. That is, don't take on everything all at once. Allow for many things in your life to be rubbish. And try to figure out just those one or two things that you think that this really matters. And this is what I'm going to work on, on next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you call it the straddling or strategy straddling or something like that, where if a company wants to do what they're doing and then also do what their competitor does, and then just you kind of eat away at the gains of both of them.
Yeah, and how true that is in terms of envy, for example, right? When we become envious of other people, we're really just it's the perfectly bad straddled strategy, because when we are jealous or envious of somebody else, we're not saying, as we ought to at least admit, we're not saying, oh, I will take on everything that they have done and are in order to gain that benefit. What we're saying is, oh, I just want the one benefit without any of the other costs or combinations that they are also taking on. So of course, if you are willing to ignore reality and just pretend that you can just have it all, we'll just have the best of everybody. I remember talking to somebody, actually it's a family member, and it was when they were a teenager, and they said, when I get married, I want to marry someone who's as funny as this member of our family, as athletic as this member of our family, as into writing as you are, and they just kept on listing all these things. What kind of a monster is being created here? You can't have all of that. You can't have all of that. And indeed, they went on to marry someone that isn't all of those things, because there isn't that person. But you can see that how we want that kind of thing to be true, but really life doesn't afford us that possibility. We must make trade-offs. That's the reality of our existence. And so now the question is, which trade-offs do we want to make? Which problem do we want? And that's a much more honest and less envious, jealous, and exhausting way of living.
I was reading Principles by Ray Dalio, and he was talking about when you're making a decision and you have multiple options. He's like, if somebody on your team just keeps pointing out that there's cons for each of the things, he's like, get rid of that person, because everything has cons. Everything is going to have the trade-offs and the hard decisions. So I thought that was because everyone's just looking for the perfect one. They're like, what's the one that has all of the benefits and none of the downside, none of the costs? And then they get frustrated. They're like, man, I can't find it. And it's like, maybe it's not out there. And the goal is to try to figure out which one, I guess, goes towards what's essential for you. But any advice on how to make that decision easier, maybe, or at least to frame it better?
Yeah, what's the super criteria? What's the one big thing you're going after? Not the 15 different semi things that you're trying to mitigate every possible risk. What's the one thing that, like, this is my why. This is what is absolutely, this is the thing that if we don't have this, the whole thing is dead. The whole thing is a huge problem. This is the one thing I really want. And then allow that in order to have that, you will not be able to have everything else. You cannot, right? I mean, it's just such a, a violation of our leadership responsibilities, of our intellectual honesty, to say, well, yeah, I just want everything to be perfect now. That's all I want. Everything perfect now. No trade-offs, no risk, no mistakes. This is not strategy. This is not decision-making. The word decision means to cut or to kill. You are choosing which things not to do, which things not to have, which things not to maximize, not which things not to optimize. Of course you can't optimize everything. Of course you can't be distinctive, brilliant, fabulous at everything. And nor do you want to be, because you want to be able to solve a particular problem. You want to solve give a particular kind of product for a particular kind of customer, not everything for everyone. You'll end up with such a mess if you try and do everything for everyone.
Well, and a lot of that, not to make it political, but about what's going on right now. There seems to be, when this whole thing was starting, it's like, do we just go for herd immunity, whether or not that exists, or do we go into immediate lockdown, and trying to straddle the two with a little bit of lockdown, a little bit of not, because everything is going to come with the cost of making the decision and wanting hey, I just want everybody to be able to go out and be fine. It's, well, there are trade-offs, and you have to be able to evaluate those.
Well, I mean, the challenge with the situation we're in right now is that the information we have is so minuscule still in comparison to the opinions. I mean, the opinions, we got 100 parts of opinion to every. It's probably higher than that, isn't it? To every one part of information. Really, seriously. And so it's very hard to evaluate any strategy. You've got Sweden's strategy. Okay, we aren't, other than the very, the very weakest, oldest and weakest in our society, everyone else is going to intermingle. So we're not going to change any of it. Well, are they right or wrong? It's very hard to say, because we will only know for sure at the end of it all where you actually have a mortality rate. And so is that the right strategy, or is it total lockdown strategy? It's based on so many unknowns. And the reason I'm saying all of that is because I am so slow to criticize anybody in this discussion. I maybe get a little tired of people jumping to criticize anybody and everyone for it. I find that very unhelpful. But in the end, when you're dealing with a situation where information is, the actual proper data is low, what I want to do is lean into gathering better information. There's a powerful story in the history of the UK where people were trying to work out what was causing a particular disease. At the time, there were just these fanciful ideas of what was causing it, and it's foreigners that are causing it. It's women. Women get more of this, so it must be it's a gender thing. And on it went, all these different theories, and there was like this one doctor who was actually going out there and gathering the data, and he found eventually that it was water source. It was water getting disease in it through not having a good water system, and so it was only certain areas that would get infected, and by figuring this out, they would just close the pumps, and the whole problem was solved. But he was gathering the data. He was figuring out what was real outside of all the opinion, when everyone else was just clamoring. And I think in a similar way, in this situation, that's what we want. And in a more practical way, because I know that we're not trying to solve that today, in our own lives, the same idea. Let's be careful about just getting caught up in whatever wind of opinion and noise and voices, all these voices, and instead get quieter, start gathering data ourselves on our own lives, keep a journal, keep writing things, try to connect the dots, and listen to our internal voice so that we know which way to go.
Beautiful. Do you, you mentioned earlier, and I think you say in the book, you've been journaling for 10 plus years. Do you have a particular way you go about that, or that you would recommend to somebody if they want to start doing that? That's something I started doing this year that I found tremendously helpful every morning, doing some journaling, to kind of focus on what is essential. But what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I have hardly missed a day in 10 years, or close to 10 years now. But I was just reading just this week journals from back like 25 years ago. And so I have been keeping journals, fairly consistently over a longer period now. I haven't done a particularly great job in going back and rereading them. And that's actually been something where I've found, it's really low hanging fruit. If you take a moment to just go back and start reading things, you have the uncomfortable situation of learning, what you thought mattered that didn't matter at all, consistent patterns of thinking that are unhelpful or helpful. Here's what I do now. I keep a journal. I mean, literally, I've just been doing this. So this is my journal for the last 90 days. Just finished it. And so very creatively, here's the new one. So that's the beginning. And the first thing that I've been doing in making the transition is I go through and create an index page. And so I'm going through every entry for the whole 90 days and just sort of writing down what the one most important thing was from that day. And so once I'm done with this, I'm 2/3 of the way through it. It took me about an hour and a half to do it. Is I'll have 3 pages with the summary of the last 90 days. And so what I'm trying to do in this process is discover the news of my own life. What is happening? What is the news? What's the headline? What's the key insight based upon this last 90 days of my life? And so the structure I follow is I'm writing down what I'm grateful for each day. So these are things that I think are important already. And they're the highlights, things that as I say, I'm grateful for. Every 2 or 3 weeks, I'll summarize that. Normally I do it every week, but in this last couple of months, I've been less formal about that. And then at the end of the 90 days, I'm doing essentially a sort of personal quarterly offsite where I'm looking across all of it. And I'm, as I say, trying to gather the news. And I found that just yesterday when I was working on it, I found it profound because I thought that there was sort of a red line between the before all of this and the after all of this. I thought my world was more different than actually it turned out to be. And I found that very intriguing, that the goals really were the same. I knew the relationships were effectively the same, but even just like the things I was grateful, it was just very consistent. And I was surprised by that because I felt the need to make what I feel are some pretty important pivots as a result of everything that's going on. But in fact, there were like golden threads running through all of it. And I think that's because if you're quiet enough, you're not being led by the noise of good times or bad times or certain times or uncertain times. You're being led by something else anyway. And this was evidence that was in fact happening.
What is something people can take away from this, say over the next day or the next week, to maybe they haven't been using this time as well as they wanted to, as I haven't. What could they do to start implementing some of this stuff to take control of this time?
Well, I always think that last shall be first. I would maybe start with exactly the thing we've just been talking about. Gratitude. In fact, I'll tell you this. So I decided to write a new book about a year ago. A little over a year now, I guess. And I'm not going to get into exactly what it's about, but I'll tell you what it's not about. The book's not about gratitude, which is why it's been fascinating that for like all through January and February, every time I would sit down and write the book, I felt this feeling, this little prompting to write a chapter on gratitude. And I'm like, I do not see how that fits in. I'm sort of having this internal wrestle. And I don't think so. I don't see that flowing at all in the logic of as I see this book, but I could not deny it. And so eventually I sort of gave into it and I was like, okay, I'm writing this. And every day I would feel the same thing when I sat down to write, I'd be like, work on that. That's the thing you should write. And I kept writing it and kept doing it. It pretty much finished it right as all of this happened. And the research that I've done, I've shared more about that chapter since then, over the last sort of whatever now it's been, eight weeks or something, than I can even believe. I've just shared it in all sorts of settings and with all sorts of groups, virtually, of course, because this is the idea for right now. I mean, when you start being grateful for the thing that's going right, it produces momentum. And so you just be grateful for anything that is both essential and going right, and you will get more of that essential thing tomorrow. Gratitude and other positive emotions are causative. They don't just correlate with great results. They cause great things to happen. And so I just read yesterday that right that sort of 2-day, 3-day period where it all pivoted from like, oh yeah, Corona's happening over there somewhere, right? It's in the news and it's affecting things, but somewhere else. It's in Asia, it's in Europe, but it's just suddenly, I mean, it's here and everything just shifts so fast, almost overnight. And I remember I was writing in there just about how by being grateful, everything suddenly started being steadied and produced this feeling of like solid optimism. And I could see as I was reading it that I could easily have gone one of two ways. You could easily become quite fatalistic and start looking at, oh my goodness, why is this happening? And look at all the losses and look at all the things that we were planning to do and how none of that, so many of these plans can't happen now. And how easy it would be to fall down that rabbit hole and then go on a negative spiral that, I think some people really will be feeling, and I don't mean to belittle it in any way. Yeah, that's a dreadful sort of tunnel to get into. But it can be changed so fast. You simply say, I am grateful for, and fill in the blank. And you'll be amazed at how instantly it can have an impact. We've done it with our own children so many times, I can't even tell you, where they'll be grumpy about something. And we'll say, okay, that's fine. You get to be grumpy. You can complain, but now you have to say something you're thankful for. And they will say things like, oh, Dad, I am thankful that Dad wants to play this stupid game. They'll say something like that, and it doesn't matter a bit. I laugh. I think it's funny. We all laugh, and within half a beat, they're laughing too. Gratitude is that powerful. It is causative even when your intent isn't particularly good about it. It will still turn night to day, still clarify what matters versus what doesn't, as fast as anything else I know. It's free, it's fast, and it's powerful. I mean, isn't that just what you want for such a time as this? That's how I would suggest people begin.
I love that. And I love the idea of doing it in like a group setting as well. That's when I've been doing my daily walks with my girlfriend, that's a big thing that will come up, and being able to talk about what you're grateful for too, and being able to go deeper on these different elements as well, as opposed to just saying in your head or writing a line about it and moving on, being able to explore that. So I love that. That's really great.
We do toasts at night. Every time we do it at night, we do toasts. Seriously, you just start off with some toasts. We do cheers. We have all sorts of like fun cheers our kids came up with when they were at school that we'll do for each person. We'll do shout outs. And it is, Barbara Fredrickson did research on this. She called it the broaden and build theory. And it shows that these positive emotions, as I mentioned before, they cause other really good things to happen. They don't just correlate with good results. So it's a game changer.
I love that. I love the toast. I'm gonna do that tonight for dinner. Greg, thank you so much. This was so much fun for me, and I think people are gonna get a ton of value out of it. Thank you very, very much. I know when this is released to folks, your podcast is going to be out. Can you talk about that as well as the course that you have available now?
Oh, I'm so excited about this podcast. I have not felt as aligned with a project in years and years. I just feel like, well, this is on the personal level. I just feel like I was built to do this, but I didn't know that till I sort of felt the timing was right with it. But this is going to be conversations about what matters. They're essential conversations. That some will be with people, recognizable names, but even with those people, it's not going to be just, hey, tell me your normal shtick. It's going to be, let's really have a conversation. Podcasts are so terrific. I love them as their own medium, an opportunity to have a kind of intimate conversation you wouldn't normally be able to have. It's not radio. They're not interviews. They're just conversations. And in this podcast, conversations about what really matters. And so we've already got, really interesting people like Tim Ferriss, like Ryan Holiday, like Arianna Huffington, like the Property Brothers, Drew and his wife. I mean, it's just some terrific things. That's just already, and lots more coming. We'll also have somewhere I just get to share some things directly. I mean, for example, that gratitude chapter, I think that ought to be an episode at some point, just awesome. what I've been learning. And some will be answers where they get to, people get to ask anything, and we'll have conversations with people. Yeah.
And it's Essentialism with Greg McKeown.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Awesome. And the Simple Productivity Skillshare class, people can just go to Skillshare and check that out.
Yeah, that's the first time that I co-created a class at Stanford called Designing Life Essentially, and I've always wanted to make that available. It's not exactly that's available. I've always wanted to have a class that anyone could take, that was public to everybody, and this is the first time that I've been able to create that. So it's in partnership with Skillshare. It's called Simple Productivity. It's 45 minutes broken up into tiny little classes, and it seems to be receiving a really great reaction so far. So yeah, that's a great other place for people to check out more Essentialism.
Awesome. I cannot wait for that podcast. That's going to be great. And if you have not already read Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, it is an incredible read. I read it a long time ago, reread it again today, and it's really great. A lot of actionable stuff in there that people can take away, especially now. Greg, thank you so much. Good luck with the podcast. Sounds like you have some incredible people lined up for that. I'm super excited for it.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks, Greg.